Good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you for joining us to discuss managed services in the age of remote work. My name is Vadim Vladimirsky, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Nerdio, where we help MSPs and enterprises alike build successful cloud practices in Microsoft Azure. As we're all very well aware, our life and business has really changed pretty dramatically in the past 5 months. And we've seen digital transformation that initially was estimated to take many years, actualized over the course of just a few quick months, in the recent past. And then emphasizing the strong growing market realization that MSP businesses needed to adapt to and optimize remote working faster than they ever thought that was possible in the past. Which is why today we've gathered some of the brightest minds in the channel and IT space to provide a well-rounded perspective on the widespread change that is happening in the channel, growing virtual desktop and remote work trends, and discussion around how your business can benefit from an Azure infrastructure play like Windows Virtual Desktop or WVD, as we're going to refer to it during our discussion today. We're excited to bring you a thought leadership webinar with such prominent guests. And this is the first of many such webinars that you can expect to see from Nerdio in the coming months. I am very honored to be joined by two very influential and well-respected thought leaders in the channel, Jay McBain and Dave Sobel. They really need no introduction to anyone who follows the MSP space closely, and I'm very happy to have them here. Jay McBain is a principal researcher at Forrester, leading the research and advisory for global channel alliances and partnerships. Jay has spent his impressive 24-year career in various channel sales, marketing, and strategy roles within IBM, Lenovo, Autotask, and Channelize. Renowned for his expertise in partner communities and one of the global leaders in social media, partner marketing, automation, and other indirect growth strategies. Jay is someone who consistently publishes the most thought-provoking and relevant analysis of the MSP ecosystem. And at Nerdio, we really rely on Jay's work to guide much of our go-to-market activities and the investments that we make in the ecosystem of MSPs. So I want to thank you, Jay, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Well, thank you. And somehow you got stuck with the long bio there, so we'll get that shortened up a little bit.
I'm also very pleased to be joined by Dave Sobel, who's a veteran IT channel and MSP expert, as well as the host of the popular podcasts on MSP Radio, A Business of Tech, and Killing It. And he always has something relevant and insightful and provocative to share. Dave is a leading expert on IT and managed services, cloud computing, virtualization, and is a featured speaker at industry events, including Microsoft Inspire and IT Nation. Dave authored the book, Virtualization Defined, and you can find his writing regularly in leading channel publications like CRN, Channel Insider, and Channelnomics. He was named the CRN Channel Chief, one of Pro's 2020 visionaries, and has been an MSP Mentor 250 member for multiple years. We at Nerdio have benefited greatly from Dave's insight and coaching. So welcome, Dave, and we are very grateful to have you here with us.
Well, thanks for having me. That's a very long-winded way of saying loudmouth, isn't it?
It's an impressive background, and what you do is great, both of you. So thank you very much for joining us. A couple of housekeeping items. We've set aside some time later in the discussion for an interactive Q&A, and are really looking forward to your questions and thoughts. You can access the chat feature throughout the discussion, and we'll do our best to respond to as many of you as possible. I know that our guests have a lot of insight that they're looking forward to sharing with you over the course of this half-hour event. So without any further delay, let's jump right into the discussion. So as a first question, I want to start the discussion by addressing how virtual desktop infrastructure is currently used and viewed by MSPs overall. So Jay, given your analyst background and extensive knowledge of the channel, would really love to hear your perspective on VDI in general and how the technology has been utilized given the COVID-19 situation. If you can paint the picture for our listeners of what the current landscape looks like, we'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bulk of my career, 17 years, was with IBM and Lenovo, selling PCs, figuring out the managed services stack on top of those, the best way to run the most, efficient, effective client server type of environment infrastructure, as well as the most secure and compliant and best governed and things like that. And, I probably spent 26 years thinking about this. And I think COVID has accelerated those thoughts by an order of magnitude. We spent March and April as an industry, basically helping our clients get people home into a new remote topology. When the stock ran out of business class notebooks, we sent them home with consumer notebooks. We sent them home with other devices. And we created this very decentralized environment now of many consumer-like devices running on consumer networks through a consumer router that you share with your neighbor that's getting access into enterprise-grade data and systems. So now that we're out of the triage phase, we're getting into the summer, the second phase of COVID. Now, the adults are in the room talking about these new threat vectors and what all this means. And the concept around virtual desktops and that broader infrastructure play is front and center with clients.
Great.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about it that way because I mean, and Jay does a good job of setting it up. I'm going to come at this analysis from another angle. Recently, some of my Patreon community had asked me to consider the question, what would I do if I was starting an MSP today? And the reason that was an interesting analysis was I was able to put aside all legacy stuff. You don't have any of the stuff that you would have had to deal with over those previous times. And what's interesting is one of my core tenets when I came up with it, when I did the analysis and thought about the way that it would make sense to build, was your cloud everything. You just start from the cloud and you start from a business application perspective and kind of work your way down. And it's really easy to build something out and say, everything is now going to be cloud. I'm just going to go full on in with everything that way, build downward, build from my business application to my business layers, then get into infrastructure because I want to protect my stack. And by doing everything cloud, that makes a ton of sense. That exercise is useful, because you can get a sense of where you might go as an MSP. But with the disruption we've seen right now, we've got layoffs, we've got people entering back into the market. There's a group of new solution providers that have all started in the last 60 days that come with none of those legacies. So not only do you have to think about it as where you want to go as a current MSP, you need to be aware that this is the competitor of the future. Looks like that because they started now.
Where, both, I guess, start with you, Jay, but where do you feel VDI as a technology is currently being utilized in the MSP's, kind of IT stack, service stack, whether it is, where is it right now and where is it likely to be given how the world has changed with COVID-19 and all of the work from home initiatives?
Yeah, it's a key element of the stack. It doesn't fit in every single situation. It doesn't fit in every scenario. And, as Dave mentioned around, infrastructure and things like that, it is a very important element for, again, situations where, clients want lower costs. They want pretty effective, efficient, predictable, highly governed environments. Again, they want to protect, in the age of Internet of Things and the flood. We were just joking about my Alexa device going off earlier, and she's about to talk in about a second. But all of these different devices, I'm asking my company to assign into the network and to get different value from. But it makes it a very difficult when you look at the threat vectors and you look at the 7 layers of security that you want to make sure that are enforced. And I think I listen to Dave every day, talk about this and the things that are the business elements of this. And that's where the conversation, and that's why it's a growing market. And it's also assigned to Azure, which is growing faster than any other cloud infrastructure at 59% year-over-year growth going into COVID. So given all of this, it's a core element. And, rather than being what I'll call on the peripheral for many years, it's actually come to the top 10 on the whiteboard. It's come to the core of the conversation of how you build out these environments effectively.
Great, thank you for that. So Dave, you mentioned, the exercise, the theoretical exercise you went through of what would building a new MSP would look like. There's probably a similar exercise of what building a new business would look like as well, from, what technologies would the business consume. And I would imagine you said, cloud everything. It would be more in the SaaS realm of things, where you're using applications that are all kind of SaaS based. Certainly not the world many of us or most live in today, where there's still legacy applications and things that need to be modernized. How do you feel VDI fits into that journey, where maybe at the far end of it's primarily SaaS, and currently there may be a lot on-prem? How does VDI help enable that transition in your opinion?
Well, yeah, it's a step from moving some of the endpoint, infrastructure into the cloud to allow it so that it can be much more securely managed. I also see it fit very much into that zero trust model of security, where if you want to start pulling the data in closely and have that be so close to manage, and I assume that I don't trust things instead of trusting them as the model, it allows you to move much, much closer and have those components in. Jay already mentioned the fact that we had to do a lot with consumer grade gear. You can do a ton with consumer grade gear if you're leveraging that a VDI style infrastructure and pulling those pieces in. So it's a nice piece of the stepping stone to get you towards thinking everything truly SaaS cloud managed.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you both for that insight. So if you think about, even prior to COVID-19, earlier this year, the three major public cloud providers, you got your Azure, your AWS, and GCP from Google, they all reported fairly significant growth in their public cloud offerings. Now at Nerdio, we're obviously huge fans of Microsoft Azure. But from an industry perspective, how should an MSP think about choosing their cloud provider? What should the channel leaders keep in mind when doing so to kind of protect their business continuity? What are the considerations? Let's start with you, Dave. What do you think about choosing the public cloud for an MSP?
Well, the funny thing is because that's a very intellectual conversation, and I'm sure Jay is going to have wonderfully nuanced ways of looking at it. I can look at this and say, I can make this really easy for people from my perspective. There's three big providers, right? There's Google, there's Amazon, there's Microsoft. So let's just start in that order. Google, okay, good luck. Go find me the GPC partner page. And if anybody can find me the way that you engage with them from a channel perspective, email it over, because I've been looking for ages and cannot find any way to truly onboard and engage with an actual dedicated partner program. Sure, I can sign up, right? And it's all automated, but good luck talking to anybody, like, a human that might answer some questions. Amazon has a delightful definition of managed services. They've got a whole managed services program, and it has about 150 companies like Deloitte and Accenture and really big names in here with a definition of managed services that's totally legitimate, but they're not really interested in the typical channel partner. So from my perspective, I can say, like, look, you've got two that are completely not interested in this space. Oh, and by the way, you've got Microsoft, who's always been partner-led and actually is interested in building out an engagement with channel partners, with MSPs, with the SMB. They have a program. So I think this is really easy, actually, is you can just say, like, two I'm not interested in. The one that actually wants my business, maybe I should talk to them.
Interesting. That sounds like it makes the choice pretty easy for most.
I think so, but I'm sure Jay has an actual nuanced view of the world.
So to respond to that, and serendipitously, 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 20 seconds ago, Google just announced a new trifurcated program globally, and they have a website for it. They have the ability to come in and build and sell and surface the trifurcated model. And they've taken some of the learnings from Microsoft. They've taken some of the learnings from AWS, and Carolee just came on at noon Eastern and disclosed it. So
I owe you a beer, Jay. You get the winner.
Yeah. Thank goodness that happened, because I told them that we were doing this and they had to get it out before this call, or they were going to look bad. So that's number one. Keep in mind, AWS still has the highest share by a pretty significant margin. They come at it from different worlds. So, AWS, and I ran a channel software company for 7 years before joining Forrester. And we built our infrastructure, we built our stack, our technology, everything else around AWS. And of the 175,000 ISVs, software companies in the world, the majority of them, the vast majority, choose AWS as an environment to build. So they may not be attracting MSPs at the same clip that Microsoft is, but if you're looking at the 800,000 emerging tech companies, the 175,000 SaaS companies, if you're looking at the system integrators, if you're looking at the broader millions of companies that make up our tech services space as everyone is flooding in, AWS gives a pretty vibrant ecosystem of players that you may play the managed services role, along with some of your, friends and neighbors in that ecosystem. That being said, Microsoft, runs 96% of their business, which is a $1.5 trillion company, through the channel. They've been this way for 3+ decades. They are the gold standard when it comes to B2B technology, the $3.6 trillion of technology spend in the world, the absolute gold standard. We could argue about a multi-cloud strategy. You may want to start with Microsoft, but wherever your customers take you, depending on the buyer, depending on the sub-industry, the geography, the sector, segment, or size that they're in, the layers of the tech stack, there's 26 layers with 200 layers before that. Where your customer is may depend on other clouds. It may also depend on hybrid cloud, the mix of on-premise and cloud, and how you work your own multi-cloud hybrid cloud should be obsessed around your customer and what drives the best for them.
Thank you both for that. I mean, I'll kind of chime in with our perspective, what we see at Nerdio by working with many MSPs. Certainly, as I mentioned, we work with those that have selected Microsoft, but I believe they've selected Microsoft, because they're familiar with the ecosystem and they've been using Microsoft products to service their customers, since becoming an MSP. That's kind of core to what they do. But I think there's two other reasons that we see as compelling reasons for the public cloud of choice to be Azure rather than the other ones. And one is around user identity, right? So for example, if a customer is using Office 365, they already have that identity information synchronized into Azure Active Directory. And that has a lot of gravity. It's easy to add things to it and expand from that identity that's already in place just by the virtue of using Office 365 or Microsoft 365, whatever the latest name happens to be. And I think that the final piece, and really a very significant one that not everyone always realizes is, SMBs use Microsoft products, and in the virtual desktop space, it's all about Windows, and Microsoft owns Windows, and Microsoft has the ability to make hosting Windows and Azure be a much more financially lucrative type of an endeavor rather than doing it in other clouds. So I think as you look into WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop specifically, I think there is no comparison of looking, Azure versus any other cloud, just purely from an economic standpoint, because of how attractive Microsoft has made it. So, I know you both are aware, obviously, but many MSPs are kind of tightening the purse strings on their IT budgets because of the changing business landscape, given the pandemic and the situation that's going on. So, Jay, we'd love to hear your take on why you think infrastructure as a service may be a worthwhile investment, and what kinds of sort of profit and revenue changes can MSPs expect if they decide to pursue it and add IaaS into their stack of services.
Yeah, so the nice thing is Forrester has a huge ability to talk to clients, and we form our opinions around what clients are telling us. So we survey almost 690,000 people a year. And it was really interesting, talking to these people week in and week out through the stages of COVID, where their focus is. Gone are the multi-million-dollar digital transformation projects that, Accenture might be running. And now they're getting very laser focused on the places that either help them survive the pandemic and the pandemonium. And, for some industries and for some customers, help them thrive, come out of it stronger than they went in. So the four areas that we're hearing over and over and over again, number one is around automation. So it's how do we extract humans from processes and workflows and business logic? And, instead of having humans as gates inside processes, have them as parallels. And so that business runs and humans add to it as opposed to, block it or slow it down. So there's a huge element there in terms of infrastructure. Number two is really around cloud acceleration. Now, these clouds aren't growing at the 59, AWS is growing at 54, Google's growing at 51. They're not growing at this clip, given the economics, uncertainty right now, but they are very rare bright spots in a world where traditional infrastructure is down 16 to 17% right now. So cloud acceleration is number two. Number three is now that the reality set in, these new threat vectors, this new remote topology, how do we manage that? For all the managed service providers, for example, that signed off of retail or residential type business, have to now start building that back into their service kits and how to cover this remote topology, how to secure it, how to reduce risk, make it more compliant, build out the redundancy, the continuity. All these things become conversations now in this new topology, which is a great opportunity. And we know that mystery drives margin. So in the next few months and then into fourth quarter, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to really have those conversations. And then the final piece we're hearing is the mini transformations around customer experience, employee experience, the rush to marketplaces and to e-commerce and things. And so those are the four elements that are on the plus side of the column or the growth side of the column when 95% of all the other 200 categories of tech are negative.
Yeah, and positioning that way also has the advantage of, I'm a big proponent for move as far up the stack as you can, and I want to play as much as I can in business process, in business applications, but I want to secure my hind flank and make sure that I'm not being attacked by infrastructure moves where I lose portions of the business. So making sure that you're well positioned on infrastructure protects you from any land grab, any kind of attacks, but also ensures that you're building on a solid foundation or in order to make those investments in business process. Anybody who listens to me knows that I rail against digital transformation as gobbledygook, but I like the core ideas, the ideas of investing in making sure that business is executing using technology. The only reason I rail is I go, well, that's always been our job. It just has a new name now. What I want to make sure is that we're doing that and using technology now about the way we implement. Sure, it's all of this. Now we're doing it with e-commerce. Now we're delivering business processes in ways we hadn't imagined, from our homes, from places that we were not thinking that we would do it. 6 months ago, everyone would have said this conversion was not possible. Well, we did, 2 to 5 years worth of conversion in 3 months. Looks to me like anything's possible if you really are motivated to get it done.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Very, very interesting. Before we head into the live Q&A portion of the webinar, I'd really like to take an opportunity to to get your take on the future of the channel, given all of these opportunities and changes that we've discussed so far. So Dave, maybe we'll start with you. What do you think managed services will look like post-COVID-19? And what are some of the new or existing opportunities that MSPs can expect to see come about in the next 12 months?
Well, so I'm going to put my responsibility hat on for a second. And anybody that listens to me knows that I always start right now with a statement of, you are still in survival mode, and this is way longer than anyone thinks. Everyone keeps talking about this in terms that thinks, it's going to be fine in a couple of weeks. All of the data tells me that this is a long, protracted slog of difficulty. So I always start my statements by going, you are making sure that your business is well run, that you're managing expenses, that you have a plan for if your customers drop 10, 20, 30% in what they're sending to you, because I want to make sure that everybody makes it to 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, however long this takes. Jay at Forrester has some data saying 25% of all solution providers aren't going to make it. So I keep screaming about this because if I can make that number 24%, I'm going to feel really good. So I keep starting from that. So before anybody gets into like the future of the channel, I keep warning everybody, you got to be running your business smartly right now. That said, I still believe that core infrastructure services, core business process services delivered on a subscription kind of basis makes a lot of sense. I think it makes sense to be focused on that business value. And if you're delivering that, as we now know, you're super critical to the business. But I don't want to make this immediate jump to everything is great, you're going to do fine. because I look and say we've got a choppy 12, 18, 24 months to go. You got to get through that, and you're still necessary as you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, at Forrester, we're predicting mid-2021 economic recovery in not a V shape, but a U shape. Now there's a 60% probability of that happening. So we're looking at another year of pretty depressed numbers. So we think the average MSP's revenue line at the top is going to drop by 17%. So that's significant. It's 11.9% this year, another 6% next year. It's not an environment that is conducive. So we want to look at bright spots. We want to get obsessed over our customers. You know, some customers are going to be on the left side of the chart, which is purely in survival mode and looking to you to help them reduce costs and help them survive. But then you're going to have customers on the right that are looking to thrive. You know, they're in an industry, they're in a geography, they're in a place where they can actually come out of this stronger, and they're looking to double down. So we saw in 2008, we saw 2001, we saw several companies coming out of this much stronger. So you got to assess each customer on their own and look at where your opportunities are, because your conversation is going to change from customer to customer. So this is kind of the future of the channel. The other thing I want to say is just in managed services. You know, today the channel globally drives $2.2 trillion in this industry. 186 billion of that is on managed services contract. And it's growing before COVID almost at double digits. But if you look at the history of this industry, you know, client server was around 10 years before managed services really started to figure out a way to predict and build a business model around a recurring model of support that really worked well for customers. And then another 10 years until it really started ramping. So if the cloud is the next battleground, you know, the cloud's been around now for 20 years. You know, Salesforce started 20 years ago, but the acceleration started 10 years ago. And right now we're really figuring out some interesting monitoring and measurement and management around cloud technologies. But if you look at this new remote topology and look at the emerging tech, AI and automation and blockchain and IoT and all these things coming, you got to know that the next, you know, 10 years is going to be mostly project-based. As people figure it out, as they experiment, as they work with it, you've got to be open to those experiments. And you're not going to sell it per month. But 10 years from then, we're going to figure out how to manage an IoT environment, and we're going to build business models and be successful. So always think with history in mind, but think in terms of decades, not in terms of, you know, what's happening next week or what's happening next month.
And I'll add, because I know Jay will agree with me, is don't be afraid of that project work, because there's a lot of it and it's quite lucrative. you may not love the fact that you can't package it up immediately and sell it monthly. That's okay, everybody. It's profitable. You'll like the money. Trust us.
And it repeats. So
right.
For anybody doing Salesforce for the last 20 years, it repeats every month forever. The change orders come in at, you know, high double, low triple digit margins. And it's
right.
so repeated that it looks like managed service.
It might as well be. It just isn't quite so perfectly packaged, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's really valuable insight, because I think, you know, there's been that transition from break-fix professional services to recurring revenue managed services. And now a lot of MSPs, you know, look down upon, you know, project revenue and professional services type revenues. And what I hear you saying is, you know, in this new world, embrace it. And certainly in the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to be really critical to succeed and remain viable in this climate in the market right now. So that's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. I guess we don't have much time for Q&A, and I don't see many questions there. Let's see if there are any questions under the Q&A section. I see one question. I'm going to read it. It says, if going to cloud everything without sticking with legacy or getting stuck with legacy, then do they still need Windows VDI on cloud? Customer may just need home laptop PC to connect to based SaaS with optional VPN for security, HTML application, not VDI, WVD or Citrix for Windows desktops thought. So I think that's what we discussed earlier on in our discussion. I think Dave, you were the one who kind of spoke about this, but I think that's VDI sort of a stepping stone to that all SaaS world that we may eventually live in. But today you kind of have to go from where point A to point B, and in order to do that, you need enabling technologies like VDI. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I would. And I've done the analysis I did on that is on a video called "If I Was Starting an MSP Today, What Would It Look Like?" It's available on YouTube. You can find it on mspradio.com if you're interested in digging into that process the way that I did the analysis, because I think it's a useful exercise to see the example, but then also to abstract it out to what your own version might look like.
Great. Well, it looks like we're out of time, so I really want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. You can check out more from Dave at mspradio.com, where he shares great insights on the MSP ecosystem, and check out all of Jay's insights on the Forrester website, where he too shares timely and very important information that all MSPs can benefit from. And the Nerdio website, getnerdio.com. We have a Nerdio Academy, where we post useful MSP information as it relates to cloud, virtual desktops, and building an MSP practice. So again, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Dave and Jay for taking out time out of your busy schedules. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.